She stepped out of the luxury sedan with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to check a price tag. Her designer heels clicked against the pavement as she turned to her friends, a smug smile playing on her lips. What happened in the next 15 minutes would shatter everything she thought she knew about power, status, and the man she had just humiliated in front of everyone. This isn't just another story about karma. This is about what happens when assumptions collide with reality in the most devastating way possible. Before we dive into what unfolded that day, we want to hear from you. Are you watching this from New York, Los Angeles, London, Manchester, or somewhere else entirely? Drop your city in the comments right now. And if you believe people should never judge others by their appearance or position, make sure to stay until the very end, because the twist in this story will leave you speechless. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that proves things are not always what they seem. Victoria Ashford, Chen had built her entire identity around one fundamental principle: appearances were everything. At 42, she had mastered the art of looking successful, even when the reality behind closed doors told a different story. Her social media showed a life of endless luxury, private events, and connections with people who mattered. What it didn't show were the maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage on her home, or the fact that her late husband's business had left her with more debt than assets. She had become an expert at maintaining the illusion, at projecting an image of wealth and success that masked a crumbling financial foundation. Every outfit was carefully chosen, every accessory strategically selected, every social media post meticulously curated to present a life that existed more in perception than in reality. But none of that mattered today. Today was about the annual charity gala at the Riverside Country Club, and Victoria had been planning her entrance for weeks. This event was her stage, her opportunity to remind everyone in her social circle that she belonged among the elite. She had called Premier Executive Transportation 3 days earlier, specifically requesting their most impressive vehicle, and, as she put it on the phone, someone who would fit the image she was trying to project. Her exact words to the booking agent had been careful and deliberate. She wanted a driver who looked the part, someone who wouldn't stand out in the wrong way, someone who understood the importance of maintaining appearances at a high-end event. The woman on the phone had paused for just a moment before responding, a slight hesitation that Victoria had barely noticed in her excitement. The agent's voice had been professional, but something in her tone suggested she had heard requests like this before, requests that said more about the client than they realized. She assured Victoria that they would send her their best, that she wouldn't be disappointed with the service. What the agent didn't say was that this request would be noted, that it would be passed along to someone who made it his business to understand exactly what kind of people his company served. When the black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to her gated community that Saturday afternoon, Victoria was ready. She had spent 3 hours getting prepared, ensuring every detail was perfect. She had chosen a cream-colored designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight, catching every ray and throwing it back with practiced brilliance. Her hair had been professionally styled that morning, her makeup applied by an artist who specialized in creating the illusion of effortless beauty. Her two closest friends, Margaret and Diane, were waiting with her in the driveway, equally dressed to impress, equally invested in maintaining the image of success and sophistication. The driver stepped out to open the door, and Victoria gave him a quick, assessing glance. He was a tall black man, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a crisp black suit and tie. Professional, polite, clean-cut, exactly what she had ordered, like a prop carefully selected for her performance. She noticed his shoes were polished to a shine, his posture was straight and confident, and his demeanor was calm and collected. In her mind, he fit the role perfectly, a backdrop against which she could display her own perceived superiority. He smiled warmly at the three women and introduced himself with genuine courtesy. His voice was smooth and educated, his manner impeccable. He told them his name was James and that he would be taking care of them today, ensuring they arrived at the gala safely and comfortably. His professionalism was evident in every gesture, every word, but Victoria barely acknowledged it. She glanced at her watch, a gesture meant to convey impatience and importance, and informed him curtly that they were running behind schedule and needed to get moving immediately. Margaret slid into the back seat first, settling into the plush leather with a satisfied sigh. Diane followed, arranging her dress carefully to avoid wrinkles. Finally, Victoria entered, her movements deliberate and performed, as if she were stepping onto a red carpet rather than into a hired car. As James closed the door and walked around to the driver's seat, Margaret leaned in close to Victoria, her voice filled with admiration and approval. She complimented Victoria on her fabulous choice with the car service, noting how impressive the vehicle was, how it elevated their arrival at the gala. Victoria waved her hand dismissively, a practiced gesture of false modesty that barely concealed her pleasure at the compliment. She told her friends that they knew her standards, that she only settled for the best in everything she did. Then, without lowering her voice even slightly, without any consideration for the fact that the driver could hear every word, she added that she had been very specific about what she wanted when making the booking. She explained that with these car services, you had to tell them exactly what you expected, down to the smallest detail, or they would send just anyone. Her tone made it clear that just anyone would be unacceptable, that there were standards to maintain, appearances to uphold. Diane glanced toward the front seat, her discomfort evident in the way she shifted in her seat. She spoke quietly, acknowledging that the driver certainly looked professional enough. But Victoria, emboldened by what she perceived as agreement, replied without any attempt at discretion. She stated that the driver looked professional precisely because she had explicitly requested someone presentable. She went on to say that people would be surprised at what sometimes showed up if you weren't absolutely clear about your expectations, implying that the service would send inappropriate or unsuitable drivers if given the chance. From the driver's seat, James remained completely silent. He adjusted the rearview mirror with steady hands, his expression neutral and professional. If he had heard Victoria's comments, and there was no way he hadn't, he gave absolutely no indication. His face remained composed, his posture relaxed, his demeanor unchanged. He was the picture of professionalism, even as he was being discussed like an object rather than a person. As they pulled out of the gated community and onto the main road, Margaret began scrolling through her phone, catching up on social media and messages. Then she looked up suddenly, her eyes widening with interest. She mentioned to the others that she had just seen something fascinating. Apparently, the owner of Premier Executive Transportation was supposed to be at the gala today. Someone had posted about it online, noting that he was one of the major sponsors this year, one of the biggest donors to the charity that the gala supported. Victoria's interest was immediately piqued. She sat up straighter, her mind already calculating how she might position herself to meet this person, how she might leverage such a connection. She asked eagerly what his name was, whether Margaret knew anything else about him. Margaret admitted she wasn't sure of his name, but she had read that he kept a pretty low profile despite his success. The post mentioned that he had built the company from absolutely nothing, starting with a single vehicle and growing it into one of the largest private transportation companies in the tri-state area. His success story was apparently quite remarkable, the kind of rags to riches narrative that inspired business school case studies. Victoria seized on this information like a predator spotting prey. She announced loudly, intentionally projecting her voice so that it would carry throughout the car, that she certainly hoped she would get the opportunity to meet him. She added that she had some feedback about their service that she was sure someone in his position would want to hear. Her tone was condescending, superior, as if she were doing this unknown business owner a favor by deigning to offer her opinions. She launched into a lecture about how important it was to maintain certain standards in the luxury service industry, about how you couldn't just hire anyone off the street to represent your company to high-end clients. In the front seat, James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The muscle flexed once, a tiny betrayal of emotion, but his hands remained steady on the wheel. He continued driving smoothly, professionally, giving no other indication that her words had any impact whatsoever. But something had shifted in the car's atmosphere, a tension that Margaret and Diane both seemed to sense even if Victoria remained oblivious to it. Victoria was warming to her subject now, enjoying the sound of her own voice, the authority she believed she was projecting. She compared Premier Executive Transportation favorably to services like Uber and Lyft, but only to use them as examples of what happened when standards slipped. She declared them complete disasters, claiming they would let literally anyone drive, that there were no standards whatsoever. She stated emphatically that this was exactly why she refused to use them, why she would never dream of getting into a car with just anyone. Her implication was clear: some people were acceptable to be in close proximity to, and others were not, and the distinction was something she believed she could determine at a glance. Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to interrupt. She began to say that perhaps they should change the subject, her tone suggesting she sensed they were venturing into inappropriate territory. But Victoria cut her off, her voice rising slightly with passionate conviction. She insisted she was serious, that this was an important topic. She recounted her conversation with the booking agent, emphasizing how she had made her expectations very clear from the start. She explained that she had specifically stated she needed someone who could blend in at a high-end event, someone who understood their role in the social hierarchy, someone who wouldn't embarrass her in front of her peers by somehow being too visible or too memorable. Then James spoke, breaking his silence with a question that hung in the air like a challenge. His voice was calm and measured, betraying no emotion, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was genuinely interested in her answer. He asked her what role exactly she was referring to, what she meant when she talked about someone understanding their role. The question was simple, direct, but it cut through all of Victoria's justifications and forced her to confront what she was actually saying. Victoria blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to speak, hadn't expected him to engage with her at all. For a moment, she seemed genuinely confused by the question, as if it had never occurred to her that the driver might have opinions or thoughts worth expressing. She asked him to repeat himself, her tone suggesting that his participation in the conversation was unexpected and somewhat inappropriate. James calmly repeated his question. He noted that she had mentioned the importance of understanding one's role, and he was simply curious what she thought that role was. He asked what exactly she meant by that, what parameters she believed defined the relationship between a client and a driver. The question was polite, professionally phrased, but it demanded an answer, demanded that she articulate what she had been implying through all her previous comments. The car fell into an uncomfortable silence. Margaret and Diane exchanged nervous glances, both of them suddenly very interested in looking out their respective windows. The tension that had been building throughout the drive suddenly became impossible to ignore. Victoria's face flushed slightly, a pink tinge creeping up her neck and into her cheeks. She clearly hadn't expected to be questioned, hadn't prepared for the possibility that the person she had been discussing so dismissively might actually challenge her assumptions. She struggled for a moment to find words, then attempted to recover her composure and her sense of superiority. She explained, her voice attempting to sound reasonable and authoritative, that it was quite simple really. A driver's role, in her view, was to provide transportation. Period. That transportation should be provided discreetly, professionally, without drawing attention to themselves or making what she termed inappropriate conversation with the clients. The implication was clear: drivers should be seen and not heard, present but invisible, functional but not fully human in their interactions. James responded with careful neutrality, acknowledging that he understood her perspective. Then he asked another question, this one more pointed. He inquired whether she felt he was not meeting those expectations, whether his conduct so far had fallen short of her standards in some way. The question put Victoria on the spot, forced her to either explicitly criticize him or backtrack from her previous statements. Victoria backtracked slightly, sensing perhaps that she had overstepped some invisible boundary. She claimed she hadn't been referring to him specifically, that she was speaking generally about the industry as a whole. Her tone suggested she was trying to regain the moral high ground, trying to reframe her comments as thoughtful industry analysis rather than personal criticism. James accepted this explanation with perfect professionalism, apologizing for any confusion and confirming that he understood. But his tone suggested he understood far more than Victoria realized, that her careful social positioning had been entirely transparent to him from the beginning. The rest of the drive continued in uncomfortable silence. Margaret made several valiant attempts to change the subject, pointing out various shops and restaurants they passed, commenting on changes to the neighborhood, asking about mutual friends and upcoming events. But Victoria remained quiet, stewing in her irritation. She was upset that the driver had dared to question her, had dared to insert himself into a conversation that she believed was above his station. In her mind, his questions had been inappropriate, a violation of the natural order she believed should govern their interaction. She didn't recognize that he had simply asked her to explain herself, to take ownership of the implications behind her words. When they finally pulled up to the country club, Victoria felt her excitement and confidence returning. The circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles of every description. Mercedes, BMWs, Bentleys, even a few Rolls-Royces were scattered among the more common luxury brands. Valets in crisp white shirts and black vests rushed between cars, their movements choreographed through years of practice. Well-dressed guests streamed toward the entrance in glittering gowns and expensive suits, all of them part of the same social performance, the same carefully maintained illusion of effortless wealth and status. This was Victoria's element. This was the world she had fought to belong to, the world she presented on social media, the world that validated her sense of self-worth. She felt her earlier discomfort fading, replaced by the familiar rush of anticipation. She belonged here, among these people, in this setting. The awkwardness of the car ride seemed less important now, a minor inconvenience already fading in her memory. James came around to open the door, moving with the same professional grace he had displayed throughout the drive. He offered his hand to help each woman out of the car, a gesture of courtesy and professionalism. Margaret accepted gratefully, steadying herself on her heels as she emerged. Diane did the same, thanking him quietly. But Victoria ignored the gesture entirely, stepping out on her own and deliberately avoiding any contact with him. It was a small act of dismissal, but a deliberate one, a way of reinforcing the boundaries she believed should exist between them. She turned to him without making eye contact, addressing him with curt instructions. She informed him that they would need pickup at 5 o'clock sharp, emphasizing the time as if he might not understand the importance of punctuality. She added that he should not be late, the implication being that she expected failures and was preemptively warning against them. James acknowledged her instructions with perfect professionalism, confirming the time and wishing them an enjoyable event. His tone remained neutral, courteous, giving no indication of anything beneath the surface. As they walked toward the entrance, Diane touched Victoria's arm gently, her touch tentative and concerned. She suggested, carefully, that perhaps Victoria had been a bit harsh with the driver back in the car. She noted that he had seemed perfectly professional throughout, that he hadn't actually done anything wrong. Her tone was diplomatic, trying not to offend Victoria while gently pointing out that her behavior might have crossed a line. Victoria scoffed loudly, a sound of dismissal and disbelief that anyone would question her judgment. She told Diane to please spare her the guilt trip. She reminded them that she had paid good money for this service, that she had every right to expect excellence, to demand the standard she believed she deserved. Then she added something that revealed the core of her worldview, the fundamental assumption that had guided all her behavior that day. She stated matter of factly that people in service positions needed to know their place. She explained that if you were too friendly with them, if you treated them as equals, they started thinking they actually were equals, and then standards inevitably slipped. She concluded by saying that she was actually doing his company a favor by maintaining high expectations, that her demanding nature was ultimately beneficial to everyone involved. Inside the ballroom, the gala was already in full swing. The space was breathtaking, designed to inspire awe and reinforce the attendees' sense of their own importance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one probably worth more than a car, their countless lights refracting through cut crystal to create patterns of dancing light across the walls and floors. Round tables covered in pristine white linens filled the space, each one set with china, crystal, and silver that spoke of understated luxury. Elaborate floral centerpieces decorated every table, arrangements of roses, orchids, and exotic flowers that would wilt and be discarded after a single evening. In one corner, a string quartet played softly, providing elegant background music that the guests barely noticed, but would have immediately missed if it stopped. Guests mingled throughout the space, champagne glasses in hand, their conversations a blend of social pleasantries, business networking, and the subtle one-upmanship that characterized their interactions. The women wore designer gowns and serious jewelry, pieces that represented significant investments. The men wore tailored suits and expensive watches, their wealth displayed in more understated but equally clear ways. This was the world Victoria aspired to, the world she pretended to inhabit more fully than she actually did. Victoria immediately began working the room with practiced skill. She moved from group to group, introducing Margaret and Diane to people she knew or wanted to know, making sure everyone saw her designer dress, her carefully selected jewelry, her perfectly styled hair and makeup. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny, agreed with opinions she didn't share, and projected an image of confidence and belonging. This was the performance she had been perfecting for years, the role she played in public, while the reality of her financial struggles remained carefully hidden behind closed doors. She made sure to comment loudly about the car service she had used, mentioning the luxury vehicle and the professional driver in a way that suggested this was her normal mode of transportation rather than a special occasion splurge she could barely afford. She wanted people to see her as someone who belonged, someone for whom luxury and excellence were simply baseline expectations rather than aspirational goals. Every interaction was calculated, every comment designed to reinforce her position in this social hierarchy. About an hour into the event, after Victoria had worked half the room and was feeling quite pleased with herself, the organizers called everyone to attention. Conversations gradually quieted as people turned toward the small stage at one end of the ballroom. A woman in an elegant black gown stepped up to the microphone, her posture and demeanor suggesting she was accustomed to commanding attention. She welcomed everyone warmly, her voice amplified throughout the space by discreetly placed speakers. She thanked everyone for joining them for what she announced was their 20th annual charity gala. She explained that many of them knew the event's purpose, but she wanted to take a moment to remind everyone why they were gathered. This gala raised funds for underprivileged youth education programs in their community, programs that provided opportunities to young people who might otherwise never have them. It supported scholarships, mentorship programs, college preparation courses, and career guidance for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The cause was important, meaningful, genuinely worthy of support, though Victoria had never given much thought to the actual purpose of the event beyond its social value. The woman continued, her voice taking on a tone of genuine warmth and respect. She explained that tonight she was particularly thrilled to introduce one of their most generous sponsors, someone whose contributions went far beyond financial support. This person, she explained, had contributed not just money but time, energy, and personal commitment. He had established mentorship programs, provided career opportunities, and personally worked with dozens of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them find paths to success that might otherwise have been closed to them. She paused for effect, building anticipation, then made the introduction that would change everything for Victoria. She asked the audience to please join her in welcoming the founder and CEO of Premier Executive Transportation, James Mitchell. Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Everything she had just been thinking, every assumption she had been operating under, every comment she had made in the car, all of it suddenly rearranged itself in her mind with devastating clarity. The same man who had driven them to the event, the man she had spoken about as if he weren't there, the man she had treated as a prop rather than a person, walked onto the stage. But he walked differently now, or perhaps Victoria was simply seeing him differently. He moved with confidence and authority, with the bearing of someone who owned the room rather than served it. He wasn't wearing a driver's cap anymore, and Victoria suddenly realized he had never been wearing one. His suit, which she had barely glanced at earlier, she now recognized as probably worth several $1,000s, far more expensive than what most of the men in the room were wearing. And his presence commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with deference or service, and everything to do with genuine achievement and respect. The color drained from Victoria's face. She felt physically ill, as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Margaret gasped audibly beside her, her hand flying to her mouth. Diane gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. All three women suddenly understood exactly what had happened, exactly what Victoria had done, and exactly how devastating the next few minutes were going to be. James Mitchell stood at the microphone, his expression warm and genuine as he looked out over the crowd. He thanked everyone for being there, for their support, for their commitment to making a difference in young people's lives. Then he began to share his story, and every word landed on Victoria like a physical blow. He explained that he had started his company 15 years ago with a single vehicle and a philosophy so simple it could be stated in one sentence. Treat every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or background. That principle, he said, had guided every decision he had made since, every hire, every policy, every interaction. It wasn't just a business strategy. It was a reflection of his deepest values, values that had been forged in his own difficult childhood. He shared that he had grown up in a neighborhood, not far from where they were sitting, in a family that struggled financially every single day. His mother had worked 3 jobs simultaneously, exhausting herself to provide for her children. His father had driven a taxi before passing away from a heart attack when James was just 12 years old. He had watched his parents work themselves to exhaustion, had seen how people of means treated them, had observed firsthand the casual cruelty that came from people who believed their wealth made them better than everyone else. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on his words. This wasn't just a speech. It was a testimony, a window into experiences that most people in this room would never have to face. James continued, explaining that he had learned early in life a fundamental truth about human character. He said that how someone treats people they perceive as beneath them says everything about who they really are. Not how they treat their equals, not how they treat people who can help them, but how they treat people they believe can do nothing for them, people they see as servants or subordinates. That, he said, is where true character reveals itself. When he started Premier Executive Transportation, he had made a decision that some people thought was strange. He decided that he would personally drive for the company regularly, not just in the early days when money was tight and he couldn't afford to hire enough staff, but always. Even as the company grew and succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, even as he could afford to hire 100 drivers, he continued to take shifts behind the wheel. He wanted to stay connected to the work, to remember where he came from, to keep himself grounded in the reality of what his employees experienced every day. But there was another reason, one that was even more important to him. He wanted to see firsthand how their clients treated his employees. He wanted to witness the interactions that happened when clients thought they were dealing with just a driver, just service staff, just someone whose opinion didn't matter, because those interactions, he explained, told him everything he needed to know about who his clients really were. Victoria felt sick. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to set down her champagne glass for fear of dropping it. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but in this room hearing these words. James explained that over the years he had driven hundreds of clients. The vast majority, he said, had been wonderful, kind, respectful, treating him like a human being rather than a servant. They engaged in pleasant conversation or comfortable silence, treated him with courtesy, tipped generously, and sometimes even struck up genuine friendships that extended beyond the business relationship. Those clients, he said, were the reason he loved what he did, the reason the company had succeeded. But every so often, he encountered someone different, someone who revealed who they truly were in those moments when they thought it didn't matter, when they thought the person serving them was insignificant and powerless. Someone who spoke about him as if he weren't there, who made assumptions about his worth based on his position, who believed that paying for a service gave them license to treat another human being with contempt. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd slowly. For just a fraction of a second, his gaze landed directly on Victoria's table. The contact lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Victoria felt her stomach drop, felt the room spin. She knew he was talking about her. Everyone would know he was talking about her. Those experiences, James continued, had taught him valuable lessons about the kind of people he wanted to do business with. Because here was the truth, the fundamental reality that money and status couldn't change. Money can't buy class. Success can't buy character. And how you treat someone who you think can do nothing for you reveals everything about who you really are at your core. The applause started slowly, scattered at first, then built to a thunderous crescendo that filled the entire ballroom. People began standing, rising from their tables to give James a standing ovation. The applause went on, dozens of people on their feet, clapping with genuine enthusiasm and respect. This wasn't polite social applause. This was real admiration for a man who had not only achieved business success, but had done so while maintaining his principles and using his success to lift others up. Margaret leaned over to Victoria, her voice barely audible over the applause, barely more than a whisper. She asked the question Victoria had been dreading. Did you know? Did Victoria know who he was when she was saying all those things in the car? The answer was obvious, but Margaret needed to hear it confirmed. Victoria couldn't speak. She just shook her head, her face burning with a humiliation so intense it was almost physical pain. She had not known. She had assumed, judged, dismissed, and belittled a man based purely on his position in that moment, never considering that he might be anything other than what she believed she saw. Diane added quietly, her voice full of concern and barely suppressed panic. What are you going to do? It was a practical question. What could Victoria possibly do now? How could she face him? How could she explain? How could she possibly make this right? Victoria's mind raced through the events of the past hour. Every comment she had made in the car replayed in her memory with excruciating clarity. Every dismissive gesture, every condescending tone, every assumption and judgment. She remembered saying that people in service positions needed to know their place. She remembered explaining that you had to be specific with these companies, or they would send just anyone. She remembered complaining about drivers who thought they were equals with their clients. Every word, every implication, every reveal of her own prejudices and assumptions came flooding back, each memory more mortifying than the last. After his speech, James stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people. Business associates wanting to congratulate him, other donors wanting to discuss collaborations, charity organizers thanking him for his generosity, guests who had been moved by his story and wanted to express their appreciation. He was gracious with everyone, taking time for genuine conversations, remembering names, asking about people's families and businesses. This was a man who had earned respect through character and action, not through inheritance or pretense. Victoria watched from a distance, paralyzed by shame and indecision. She couldn't approach him, couldn't join that crowd of admirers, couldn't pretend that everything was fine. But she also couldn't leave. She was trapped, stuck in this ballroom with the man she had just insulted, surrounded by people who would soon hear about what she had done, facing a reckoning she had never imagined possible. Margaret touched her arm gently, her voice full of sympathy. She suggested quietly that maybe they should just leave, slip out before anyone noticed, try to minimize the damage. Victoria could claim illness, could send an apology later, could try to handle this crisis from a safe distance. But Diane immediately pointed out the flaw in that plan, her voice making clear how dire their situation actually was. They couldn't leave. He was their ride home. Victoria had specifically requested pickup at 5 o'clock sharp. The man she had spent the entire drive insulting and belittling was going to be the one picking them up, driving them home, spending at least another 30 minutes in close proximity while Victoria squirmed under the weight of her own actions. Victoria closed her eyes, wanting to block out the reality but unable to escape it. Of course he would be their driver again. She had made such a point about the pickup time, had emphasized not to be late, had treated him like an employee who needed clear instructions. And he had agreed, had confirmed the time, had given no indication that anything would be different. She was going to have to face him again. And this time there would be no pretending, no plausible deniability, no way to avoid the truth of what she had done. The next 2 hours were absolute torture. Victoria tried to function normally, tried to smile and nod and participate in conversations, but she couldn't focus on anything. She smiled mechanically when people spoke to her, her face frozen in an expression that felt more like a grimace than genuine pleasure. She laughed at jokes she didn't hear, the sound hollow and forced. She agreed to plans she wouldn't remember, committed to events she wouldn't attend. All the while, she watched the clock with growing dread, each passing minute bringing her closer to the moment when she would have to face James Mitchell again. At 4:45, her phone buzzed in her small designer clutch. She pulled it out with shaking hands, already knowing what the message would say. It was from an unknown number, the text brief and professional. Your car will be waiting at the front entrance at 5 o'clock as requested. Premier Executive Transportation. She stared at the words, trying to find some clue about what awaited her. Would he be angry? Would he confront her publicly? Would he simply refuse to serve her, leaving them stranded as a form of poetic justice? The message gave nothing away, maintaining the same professional courtesy he had shown all along. Somehow that made it worse. She had no idea what to expect, no way to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. Her hands shook as she showed the message to Margaret and Diane. Both women read it in silence, their faces reflecting the same anxiety Victoria felt. Margaret suggested hopefully that maybe he wouldn't be the one driving, that maybe he would send another driver, spare them all the awkwardness of another encounter. Her voice made clear she didn't really believe this, but she was grasping at any possibility that might make the situation less terrible. Diane countered immediately, her tone more realistic and far less optimistic. She suggested that maybe this was his chance to confront Victoria directly, to say all the things he couldn't say during his speech, to exact some personal revenge for the way she had treated him. She asked what Victoria was planning to say to him, how she intended to handle the conversation. Her voice made it clear she didn't think there were any good options, that Victoria had backed herself into a corner with no graceful exits. Victoria had no answer. What could she possibly say? What words existed that could undo what she had done, that could take back the things she had said, that could somehow make this right? She had revealed herself completely, shown him exactly who she was when she thought it didn't matter. How do you apologize for that? How do you explain that away? At 5 o'clock exactly, the three women walked out to the front entrance. Each step felt heavy, like walking to an execution. The valet area was busy with departing guests, luxury vehicles pulling up and driving away in a choreographed dance of wealth and privilege. And there, exactly where he said it would be, was the same black Mercedes from that morning. And James Mitchell stood beside it, the door already open, waiting for them with the same professional posture, the same neutral expression. Victoria's legs felt weak as she approached. She wondered if they would actually support her, if she might collapse right there on the country club steps. James's expression was unreadable, perfectly professional and neutral, exactly as it had been that morning before everything changed. He greeted them with the same calm courtesy, telling them good evening and expressing hope that they had enjoyed the event. His tone gave away nothing about what he was thinking or feeling. Margaret and Diane quickly slid into the back seat, moving faster than necessary, clearly wanting to escape the tension of standing there. Their speed left Victoria standing alone on the curb, face to face with the man she had disrespected so thoroughly just hours earlier. This was it. This was her moment to say something, to try to make this better, to at least acknowledge what she had done. Victoria's voice cracked as she began, her throat tight with emotion. She addressed him properly for the first time as Mr. Mitchell. She told him that she needed to apologize, that she owed him an explanation, that she was mortified by her own behavior. The words came out jumbled and inadequate, but they were genuine. For perhaps the first time in years, Victoria was speaking without calculation, without performing, without trying to manage appearances. James's response was calm and controlled. He suggested that she please get in the car, that they could talk during the drive home. His tone wasn't angry or hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was simply professional, maintaining the same boundaries he had established from the beginning. Victoria slid into the back seat, and James closed the door gently behind her. The click of it shutting had a finality to it, like a cell door locking, trapping her in this enclosed space with the consequences of her actions. As they pulled away from the country club, away from the lights and crowds and safety of public space, James spoke without turning around. His question was pointed but delivered calmly, asking whether she had managed to provide her feedback to the owner of the company. He reminded her that she had mentioned having some thoughts about maintaining standards, about the importance of hiring the right kind of people. He was quoting her own words back to her, forcing her to confront exactly what she had said. Victoria felt tears pricking at her eyes, hot and stinging. She couldn't hold them back anymore. She told him she was sorry, repeating it multiple times as if repetition could somehow increase the sincerity. She acknowledged that the things she had said and the way she had treated him were inexcusable. She called herself horrible, a snob, a bigot, all the things she knew were true, but had never admitted out loud before. She told him he had every right to be angry with her, that she would understand whatever consequences heck was to impose, that she deserved whatever judgment he decided to pass on her behavior. James's response surprised her. His voice remained calm, measured, almost contemplative. He told her he wasn't angry. Anger, he explained, was what he felt toward people who knew better, but chose to act badly anyway. What he felt toward her was disappointment. But more than that, he was curious. He wanted to understand what made her think it was acceptable to speak to another human being the way she had spoken to him. What worldview, what set of beliefs, what experiences had shaped her into someone who could dismiss another person so completely based solely on their perceived position in a social hierarchy? Victoria struggled to answer. The truth was ugly, and speaking it out loud made it even uglier. She stammered through an explanation that wasn't really an explanation at all. She said she didn't know, which was a lie. She did know. She supposed she had thought that because she was paying for a service, because she was the customer and he was the driver, that somehow created a natural order, a hierarchy that justified her behavior. But saying it out loud revealed how hollow and cruel that reasoning actually was. James pressed her on it, his tone still gentle but insistent. He asked if that was it, if she had assumed that being the customer and him being the driver made her better than him as a human being. He wanted her to say it explicitly, to own what she had been thinking, to stop hiding behind vague justifications and euphemisms. Victoria whispered her confirmation through tears that were now streaming freely down her face. Yes, that was exactly what she had thought. She had believed that her position as the paying customer elevated her, made her more important, gave her certain rights and privileges in how she could treat him, and she acknowledged that she had been wrong, completely and utterly wrong. There was no justification, no excuse, no way to make it sound reasonable or acceptable. She had been cruel, and she had been cruel based on assumptions about worth and value that crumbled the moment they were examined. The car fell silent except for the quiet sound of Victoria's crying. Margaret and Diane sat frozen in their seats, barely breathing, witnesses to this painful reckoning. Neither of them spoke, perhaps recognizing that this was between Victoria and James, that their involvement would only complicate an already devastating situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, James spoke again. His voice was sad rather than angry, disappointed rather than vengeful. He asked Victoria if she knew why he still drove sometimes, why he continued to take shifts behind the wheel, despite having built a successful company with hundreds of employees who could handle the work. He explained that it wasn't because he had to, wasn't because he couldn't afford to hire enough staff or couldn't trust his employees. He did it because it kept him humble. It reminded him of something fundamental, that success could make people forget. No position or title makes someone more valuable as a human being than anyone else. We are all simply people, deserving of the same basic dignity and respect. He paused, gathering his thoughts, then continued with a story that made Victoria's shame even more profound. He told her about his mother, about how she had cleaned houses for wealthy families, families much like the one Victoria pretended to be part of. He described watching his mother come home, exhausted day after day, having spent hours scrubbing floors and toilets and bathrooms for people who treated her like she was invisible. Those families never learned her name, never asked about her children, never acknowledged her as a full human being with dreams and struggles and value. She was just the maid, just the help, just someone who existed to make their lives more comfortable. He told Victoria that he had made himself a promise as a young boy, watching his mother suffer through that treatment. He promised that if he ever made something of himself, if he ever achieved success and wealth, he would never forget where he came from. More importantly, he would never treat anyone the way those families had treated his mother. He would see the humanity in every person he encountered, regardless of their job or position or circumstances. That promise had guided his entire life, had shaped his business philosophy, had informed every decision he made about how to treat employees and clients alike. Victoria was openly sobbing now, her carefully applied makeup running down her face, her composure completely shattered. She told him again that she was sorry, that he was absolutely right about everything, that she had no excuses. She explained that she had been raised in an environment that taught her money and status made people superior, that social class was a real and meaningful distinction that justified different treatment. But she could see now that all it had really done was make her cruel. It had given her permission to dismiss and demean people, to treat service workers and employees as less than human, to believe that her perceived position in society came with special privileges. She acknowledged that she had no excuse for how she had behaved, that her upbringing might explain her attitudes, but didn't justify them. James pulled up to Victoria's house, the gates of her gated community, opening automatically to admit them. He navigated the familiar streets to her driveway, and then did something unexpected. He turned around in his seat to face her directly for the first time since they had left the gala. His expression wasn't angry, wasn't vindictive or satisfied to see her suffering. It was sad, genuinely sad, as if her cruelty had hurt him not because of what it meant for him, but because of what it revealed about her. He told her he was going to share something with her, and he wanted her to really hear it, to let it sink in completely. He reminded her that she had called his company days earlier and specifically requested a driver who looked a certain way. He asked if she remembered exactly what she had said during that phone call. Victoria nodded miserably, unable to meet his eyes, remembering her careful phrasing, her coded language designed to communicate her expectations without being too explicit. James spelled it out for her, taking away any ambiguity or deniability. He explained that when she said she wanted someone who could blend in at a high-end event and who understood their role, what she actually meant was that she wanted someone who looked subservient, someone who looked like hired help, someone who, if they were being completely honest about it, fit her preconceived idea of what a servant should look like. And given that she had been pleased when he arrived, given that he had met her expectations perfectly, they both knew what that meant about the assumptions baked into her request. Victoria whispered her agreement, unable to deny it. Yes, that was exactly what she had meant. She had made racist and classist assumptions, had wanted someone who would make her look good by comparison, who would serve as a backdrop to her own perceived superiority. It was, she acknowledged, evil. Not just wrong or inappropriate or unfortunate, but actually evil in its casual dehumanization of another person. James agreed that her behavior had been all of those things. But then, in his next words, he offered something Victoria hadn't expected and didn't feel she deserved. He told her that he believed people could change. Not everyone and not easily, but genuinely. He believed that people could learn from their mistakes if they were willing to be truly honest about them, if they were willing to do the difficult work of examining their assumptions and changing their behavior. The question was whether Victoria was willing to do that work, whether this experience would actually change her, or whether she would simply become more careful about hiding her prejudices. However, he continued, his tone shifting slightly to something more purposeful. He wanted to offer her something, an opportunity, a chance to do more than just apologize and move on. Victoria waited, confused about what he could possibly be offering her after everything that had happened. James explained that his company had a program, one that was very important to him personally. They provided free interview coaching and career guidance to people who were trying to get back on their feet, people who had faced discrimination in hiring, who had been judged unfairly based on their appearance or background rather than their qualifications, people who had made mistakes and were trying to rebuild their lives, people who just needed someone to see their potential instead of their circumstances, to give them a chance when everyone else had written them off. The program was always looking for volunteers to help with mock interviews, to provide feedback, to share professional knowledge and connections. He looked directly at Victoria, his gaze steady and serious. He told her that he thought she should volunteer. He thought she should spend some time listening to the stories of people who had been on the receiving end of the kind of judgment she had displayed, hearing what it was like to be dismissed because of how you looked, where you came from, what job you held. Maybe, he suggested, that would give her some much-needed perspective. Maybe it would help her understand the real impact of the assumptions and prejudices she had been carrying around. Victoria stared at him in complete disbelief. After everything she had done, after the way she had treated him, after revealing herself to be exactly the kind of person his life's work was designed to counter, he was offering her a chance to make amends. He wasn't just accepting her apology and moving on. He wasn't punishing her or exposing her publicly or refusing to do business with her. He was offering her redemption, a path forward, an opportunity to actually become a better person rather than just feeling bad about being a terrible one. Her voice was choked with emotion as she accepted, barely able to get the words out. Yes, she would be honored to volunteer. She thanked him over and over for not just writing her off as a lost cause, for seeing something in her worth saving even when she had shown him the worst of herself. The gratitude was overwhelming, mixed with shame and relief and a desperate hope that maybe, somehow she could actually change. James nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. But he had one more question, the most important one. He asked directly whether she was genuinely willing to change. Not just sorry about getting caught, not just embarrassed about the social consequences, but actually willing to do the hard work of examining her beliefs and changing her behavior. Was she ready for that? Victoria answered firmly, with more conviction than she had felt about anything in a long time. Yes, she was willing. She promised him that she would do the work, that she would take this seriously, that she understood this was her chance to become someone different, someone better. Margaret and Diane helped her out of the car, supporting her physically as she seemed almost unable to stand on her own. As they stood on the curb in front of Victoria's house, James rolled down the window. He handed her a business card, his movements deliberate and professional. He told her to call the number on Monday morning and ask for Sarah, who coordinated their volunteer program. She should tell Sarah that James had sent her, and Sarah would get her set up with training and schedule her first sessions. It was a concrete next step, a way to turn this devastating experience into actual change, rather than just another story she would eventually rationalize away. But James had one more thing to say, one more gift to give her, though she certainly didn't deserve it. He told her that this ride was complimentary, that there would be no charge for the service today. Victoria should consider it a gift, though the word seemed almost ironic given the circumstances. But he wanted her to take the money she would have spent on the car service and donate it to the youth education fund from the gala. Could she do that? Would she follow through on this small act of putting her money towards something meaningful rather than just her own image? Victoria nodded vigorously, agreeing immediately. She would donate the money first thing in the morning, would make sure it went to the fund, would do this small thing to begin making amends. It was such a minor action compared to what she owed, but it was something concrete, something real. James gave her a small smile then, the first genuine one she had seen from him all day. It wasn't a big smile, wasn't filled with warmth or forgiveness, but it suggested the possibility of both. It suggested that he believed her, that he thought she might actually follow through, that redemption was at least possible, even if not guaranteed. He told her he hoped she would take this experience and really think about how she moved through the world, how she treated people, what assumptions she made, and why she made them. Then he offered her one final piece of wisdom, the lesson that Victoria would carry with her for the rest of her life. He told her that the truth was, you never really know who you're talking to. That person you dismiss as unimportant, that person you treat as invisible or inferior, that person might be the very person who could change your life. They might be the business owner you want to impress, the connection you need for your career, the person whose opinion matters more than you could possibly imagine. But more importantly, they were always, in every case, a full human being deserving of respect and dignity. That should be reason enough. As the Mercedes pulled away, Victoria stood watching it disappear down the street, Margaret and Diane on either side of her like sentries. The silence stretched for a long moment before Diane broke it, her voice gentle and concerned. She asked if Victoria was okay, though the answer was obvious to everyone. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, trying to process everything that had happened. She answered honestly, no, she wasn't okay, but she would be. She had a lot of work to do, a lot of things to change about herself, a lot of behaviors to examine and assumptions to challenge. The person she had been that morning seemed like a stranger now, or perhaps she was finally seeing that person clearly for the first time. Either way, change was necessary and it was going to be hard. Margaret squeezed her hand, her touch warm and supportive. She told Victoria that they would help her, that they would support her through this process. That's what friends did, she said. They didn't abandon you when you made mistakes. They helped you become better. And Victoria was going to need that support because the work ahead of her was going to require more honesty and vulnerability than she had shown in years. Over the following weeks and months, Victoria did exactly what James had suggested. She called Sarah on Monday morning and signed up for the volunteer program. She went through the training, learning how to conduct effective mock interviews, how to provide constructive feedback, how to help people present their best selves to potential employers. But more importantly, she listened. She listened to stories from people who had faced discrimination and prejudice throughout their careers. She heard from a former corporate executive, a man in his 50s who had lost everything in the financial crisis and had to start over from nothing. He described going to interviews where people couldn't see past his age and his employment gap, where they dismissed him before he even had a chance to explain his qualifications. He talked about the humiliation of being treated like he was worthless, like his decades of experience meant nothing because of temporary circumstances beyond his control. She met a single mother working 3 jobs simultaneously, just like James's mother had done. This woman was brilliant and capable, had a college degree and relevant experience, but she was trapped in low-wage service work because employers wouldn't take a chance on someone with her background. She described the exhaustion of working 16-hour days, of never seeing her children except when they were sleeping, of being treated as invisible by the people she served. She talked about customers who wouldn't make eye contact with her, who spoke about her as if she weren't standing right there, who made assumptions about her intelligence and worth based solely on her uniform. She spoke with young people of color who were told repeatedly, explicitly and implicitly, that they didn't belong in certain spaces, certain careers, certain lives. They shared stories of being followed in stores, questioned in professional settings, assumed to be less qualified than their white peers. They described the exhausting work of constantly having to prove themselves, of being held to higher standards, of having to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. They talked about teachers who discouraged them from ambitious goals, employers who overlooked their applications, colleagues who dismissed their contributions. Each story was a mirror reflecting back some aspect of Victoria's own behavior and assumptions. Each conversation revealed another layer of privilege and prejudice she had never examined, never questioned, never even noticed. The work was painful and humbling, forcing her to confront truths about herself that she had spent years avoiding. She began to see patterns in her own life that she had never recognized before. She realized that every service worker she encountered was a real person with a full life, with struggles and dreams and value that had nothing to do with their job. The woman who cleaned her house had a name, a family, a story that Victoria had never bothered to learn. The valet who parked her car was working his way through law school. The waiter at her favorite restaurant was a talented musician trying to build a career. All these people she had treated as invisible, as functionally invisible, were living full and complex lives that she had never acknowledged. She noticed how her social circle talked about service workers, the casual dismissiveness, the assumptions, the jokes that weren't really jokes. She began speaking up, gently at first, then more firmly, pointing out when comments crossed lines, when behavior was inappropriate, when assumptions were being made. Some of her friends responded well, appreciating the perspective. Others became defensive, accused her of being too sensitive, of making things awkward. Victoria lost some relationships during this period, but she gained something far more valuable: integrity. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand. The world looked very different when you actually listened to people instead of dismissing them. When you saw them as human beings with inherent worth rather than as categories or stereotypes or functions to be performed. When you recognized that dignity and respect weren't things people earned through achievement or status, but rather were basic rights that belonged to every person simply because they were human. 3 months after that devastating day at the gala, Victoria received an invitation to Premier Executive Transportation's annual Employee Appreciation Dinner. She held the elegant invitation in her hands for a long time, debating whether to attend. The idea of facing James again, of being in a room full of his employees who might have heard some version of what happened, filled her with anxiety. The shame hadn't fully faded. She didn't know if it ever would or if it should. But Margaret convinced her it was important to go. This was James extending another hand, offering another opportunity. Refusing it would be an act of cowardice, of prioritizing her own comfort over growth and relationship. So Victoria accepted, spending the days leading up to the event genuinely nervous in a way she hadn't been nervous about a social event in years. When she arrived at the venue, a beautiful restaurant that James had rented out for the evening, she was greeted warmly at the door by James himself. He smiled at her, a genuine smile full of warmth, and thanked her for coming. He addressed her as Mrs. Ashford Chen, maintaining professional courtesy. Then he told her something that caught her completely off guard. Sarah, the volunteer coordinator, had been telling him about Victoria's work with the program. She had been, James said, an incredible volunteer. Dedicated, thoughtful, genuinely engaged with the people she was helping. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude and relief, and something like pride, though she didn't quite feel she had earned that yet. She asked James to please call her Victoria, dropping the formal title, trying to establish a more genuine connection. Then she told him what she had been thinking about for months. She should be thanking him. He could have destroyed her reputation that day at the gala. He could have exposed her publicly, could have told everyone exactly what she had said and how she had behaved. It would have been justified, would have been what she deserved. But instead, he had given her a chance to be better. He had offered her a path to redemption rather than simply punishment. She would never forget that gift, that grace, that belief in her capacity to change. James smiled, his expression warm and understanding. He shared something he had learned over the years, a principle that had guided his approach to Victoria and to countless others. He said that most people, fundamentally, weren't truly bad. They weren't evil or irredeemable. They were just operating on assumptions they had never questioned, beliefs they had absorbed from their environment without examining them critically. Once you gave them a reason to question those assumptions, once you held up a mirror that forced them to see clearly, they could change. Not everyone would, but many could if given the chance. Victoria had proven that. She had done the work, had faced her own ugliness honestly, had made real changes rather than just performative ones. As Victoria mingled with James's employees that evening, She found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations. She listened to their stories, celebrated their successes, asked about their families and goals and dreams. These weren't networking opportunities or social performances. These were real connections with real people, the kind of interactions she had been avoiding for years behind her carefully constructed social persona. She spoke with drivers who were putting themselves through school, with dispatchers who were supporting extended families, with mechanics who had fascinating hobbies and passions. She met Sarah, the volunteer coordinator, and thanked her for her patience and guidance. She talked with several people she had worked with through the mentorship program, hearing how they had successfully landed jobs, how the coaching had helped them present themselves with confidence, how someone believing in them had made all the difference. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria realized something profound. The person she had been that day in the car, the person who had treated James with such casual cruelty, who had believed that status and money made her superior to others, that person was gone. Not hidden or suppressed or waiting to reemerge, but actually gone, replaced by someone different. In her place was someone who finally understood a truth she should have learned decades earlier. Dignity and respect weren't things you earned through wealth or position or achievement. They were things every human being deserved, simply because they were human. She understood, now that the hierarchies she had believed in, the social structures she had thought were natural and inevitable, were constructions designed to justify inequality. They were lies that allowed people like the old Victoria to treat others badly without feeling guilty about it. And once you stopped believing those lies, once you recognized the fundamental equality and worth of every person, you couldn't go back. You couldn't unsee it. You couldn't return to the comfortable delusion that some people mattered more than others. Before you go, we want to ask you something important, something we hope you'll really think about. Have you ever judged someone based on their job, their appearance, or their position, only to later realize you were completely wrong about who they were? Have you made assumptions about someone's worth or intelligence or character based on superficial characteristics that had nothing to do with who they actually were as a person? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of that kind of judgment. Maybe you've been dismissed or overlooked or treated as invisible because of your job or your background or how you looked. Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can be honest about these experiences, where we can learn from each other's mistakes and perspectives. And if this story made you think differently about how you treat people, if it challenged any of your own assumptions or made you examine your behavior in new ways, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Share it with someone who works in service industries, who gets dismissed regularly by people who think their position makes them superior. Share it with someone who has privilege but might not recognize it. Share it with someone who is teaching children, because these lessons need to be learned early before prejudices become so deeply ingrained that they're hard to recognize. Remember, and this is the core truth that Victoria learned through devastating experience, you never truly know who you're talking to. That person serving you coffee at your morning cafe might be working on a doctorate in philosophy. That person driving your Uber might be a talented artist building a career. That person cleaning your office might be supporting 3 generations of family. That person standing behind a counter at a store might be building an empire, fighting through personal tragedy, or carrying a story that would humble you if you took the time to listen. They might also be none of those things. They might just be someone doing their job, supporting themselves, living their life. And here's the crucial point: it doesn't matter. Their worth doesn't depend on having an impressive backstory or hidden achievements. They deserve your respect and dignity simply because they're human. That's it. That's the only qualification necessary. You don't need to know their story to treat them well. You don't need to know their potential to acknowledge their humanity. You don't need to know what they might become to respect who they are right now. The way you treat people when you think it doesn't matter reveals everything about your character. The way you interact with someone who you believe has no power over you, who you think will never affect your life in any meaningful way, who you see as simply performing a function rather than living a full existence, that reveals who you really are underneath all the social performance and careful image management. And to the James Mitchells of the world, and we know you're out there, we know you're watching this, the people who rise above prejudice and discrimination and still choose compassion over revenge, who could destroy someone who has wronged them, but instead offer them redemption, who see potential in people even when they've shown you their worst selves. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us all that true power isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting them up, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Because that's when grace matters most, when it's most difficult to extend, when it costs you something to offer it. You remind us that we can break cycles of cruelty and prejudice. That we don't have to respond to hurt with more hurt, to injustice with more injustice. That choosing compassion even when it's hard is how we actually change the world one interaction at a time. What's the lesson here? It's simple but profound, easy to understand but difficult to truly internalize and live by. Character isn't shown in how you treat your equals, your friends, your family, the people you need something from, or who can help you advance. That's easy. Everyone can be kind to people they see as important or useful. Real character is shown in how you treat those you perceive as beneath you, though hopefully this story has taught us all that there is no such thing as beneath you. There are only other human beings, equally valuable, equally deserving of dignity and respect. And the moment you truly realize that, the moment you internalize it so deeply that it changes your behavior automatically without conscious effort, the moment you stop seeing hierarchies of human worth and start seeing simply humans, that's the moment you truly become someone worth respecting. That's the moment you develop actual class, actual character, actual integrity that can't be bought or performed or faked. If this story resonated with you, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Let's spread this message until everyone understands that every single person you meet deserves your respect. Not because of what they can do for you. Not because of what position they hold or what credentials they have or what potential they might possess. But simply because they're human. That's enough. That's always been enough. That should always be enough. And maybe, if enough of us really believe that and really act on it, we can create a world where no one has to drive their own company cars just to find out which of their clients has basic human decency. A world where respect is the default rather than something that has to be earned or demanded or fought for. A world where Victoria's transformation isn't remarkable, but simply normal, where we all recognize our own prejudices and actively work to change them. That's the world James Mitchell is working to build, one ride at a time, one mentorship at a time, one second chance at a time. And that's the world we should all be working to build, in our own ways, through our own choices about how we treat every single person we encounter every single day, because every interaction is a choice. And those choices define who we are, reveal who we've been, and determine who we're becoming.